Hello, everyone. Welcome to the GEMS podcast. I am so glad you all are here.
Hello, everyone. Today we are so lucky to be joined by Dr. Samilia Pyuzza, who is a doctor of physiology and biophysics and currently serves as a commissioner of the state of Maryland at the Governor's Office of Service and Volunteerism. Thank you so much for joining us today. Do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Samilia, and I grew up in North Carolina. I went to Norfolk State University, which is in Norfolk, Virginia, and I got my bachelor's degree in optical engineering. After that, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, and I decided that I would get a Ph.D. So I went to Howard University and got a Ph.D. in physiology and biophysics, and I ended up doing my research at NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health, in the National Eye Institute. And so once I finished that, I needed some time off. So I took some time off and ended up serving in AmeriCorps through Volunteer Maryland. And from there, I just realized that I really felt called to build a career with nonprofit and community development. And so that's what I've been doing ever since.
So your undergrad, you said, had to deal with optical engineering. And then when you went to pursue your PhD, your research consisted of optical nerves. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So when I started my undergraduate degree, I really wanted to do biomedical engineering, but the school that I got a scholarship to didn't have it. So what I did was I majored in optical engineering, and you learn about just optical systems in general. So I would have summer experiences, and those summer experiences I used to kind of get more biomedical opportunities like under my belt. And so I kind of crafted my own degree from that. So when I left my optical engineering degree and once I finished and graduated, I had a tremendous amount of knowledge about the eye as an optical system, but I wanted to learn more about the eye as a biological system. And so I went to Howard and was able to major in neurophysiology, and it kind of went from there. So my research really dug into disorders of the optical system.
And what specifically did you do? How did you select that research? Was it the National Institute of Health was looking into those things and, was looking for people to research it? Because obviously, you need funding. So what was that selection process of finding that thesis?
So for me, when I came in at Howard, so I started at Howard first, and there was actually one visual system specialist in my department when I started. And so I just knew I was going to work with him. He did primate neurobiology, and so I was excited to work with him. And the year that I got there, he left. So I was kind of, trying to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to get this research? Because there were other specialists there. There was a renal specialist. There were a number of cardiovascular specialists and neurospecialists in the brain specifically, but I wanted to be in the eye. And so I first had the opportunity to travel abroad, and so I went to France and Germany and did some rotations in labs there. And they were fantastic experiences, but I had actually got to work up close with macaque monkeys or primates and realized, I actually don't think I want to work in primate neurobiology or in the visual system of primates. And so I came back and reached out to a couple of labs at NIH because they had a graduate partnership program, which would, allow you funding and a living stipend. And so when I came back and reached out to a number of labs, I was able to get an intramural training research award, and that allowed for me to fund that funded my degree. And through those awards, the labs that you go into already have funding for specific research projects that they're working on. So you come in and kind of create your own project under the guidance of the PI. Sometimes there's postdocs who are working on similar projects but answering different questions. And so that's how it was for me. I had my own idea of what I wanted to work on, and I fit that under the umbrella of someone else's lab.
And prior to that experience and just your journey throughout undergrad and graduate school, what drew you into doing biophysics, or what drew you into STEM in general?
So for me, it was very personal. So my mom has a PhD as well, and she works in plant physiology. So she was getting her PhD when I was really young. And so I spent a lot of time in the lab with her, right, racking pipette tips, and I just grew up around the sciences. So I always had an interest. I had science kits at home, and we would do science experiments. So I always had like a natural leaning towards STEM fields anyways, because that's what I grew up around. But I also did a number of summer programs, probably from the time 6th grade each summer. I would be in someone's STEM-based, learning experience, and that allowed me to look at different avenues. And so that's how I was kind of able to, say, okay, I like this or I don't like that. And when I was around a junior in high school, I had a close friend whose parent passed away. And so that kind of got me, he passed away from cancer. And so that got me really interested in just biomedical research and medicine. And so I kind of paved my path that way. Like I used my natural leanings and natural inclinations, but then external experiences also influenced how that path was shaped.
And having those influences, like with your mom with a PhD and the people around you supporting that gift and passion in STEM, did you notice apparent gaps between men and women or any type of adversity like that?
So I would say the only gap that I saw, like not educationally, but confidence-wise, that's the biggest thing that I saw. So when I remember it distinctly. So my first engineering class that I had, there were, I think, if there were 25 people in the class, 3 of us were women, and that's including myself. And I just remember sitting there feeling like they all know something that I don't know, because they were much more confident in answering questions. They were, much more willing to raise their hand. And it took me probably like 2 or 3 weeks, and I realized like, okay, they don't necessarily know more than me. They're just more willing to raise their hand. And so that was the biggest difference that I noticed. It was a confidence difference, not a knowledge difference.
And do you think with like your background and having those different experiences allowed you to bring a new perspective to those conversations? Do you think, I guess I would like to reiterate, in past episodes we've talked about how, people from different walks of life have been able to give that perception that someone else might not have. And so could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think regardless of the field that you go in, diversity of thought is really important. And that diversity in thought will come from diversity of experiences. So for me, my family grew up on the coast. And so someone who grew up on the coast and, doing boating or fishing is going to be a lot different than someone who grew up in the mountains, right? Just because their experiences are different. So it's not that one is better than the other, they're just different. So when you bring that diversity of thought into the room together, you're really able to look at the same problem and come up with a multitude of different ways to approach it. And so when you bring diversity of thought into the conversation, you're always going to have a better product in the end, because many different people are looking at it from many different ways.
Absolutely. And you said growing up on the coast, so from North Carolina and now you're in Maryland. What brought you there? How did you end up in Maryland?
Sure. So after I finished my degree, so I lived in D.C., which is where Howard University is. I lived in D.C. and then I met my husband, and he was working at a power plant, which most people don't realize is a power plant in southern Maryland, just 1 hour away from D.C. There's a nuclear power plant, and so we came down to Calvert County, and that's where I am now, and it's my home now, and it's still on the coast. I've returned to my roots in some respects, but just a couple of states north. And I love it here, and I love my community here.
And working with nonprofits in your community and just volunteering and service and everything in that aspect, what does your day consist of? What does that look like?
So my day is really dynamic. So I actually work with a handful of different nonprofits. And so for my primary job, I manage projects. And so I manage projects for a local nonprofit, but also for an international nonprofit in Honduras. And so really my day is really very dynamic. Checking in, it's, making sure that we're meeting project goals, and a lot of that experience and making sure that the project is moving along efficiently comes from my formal training during my dissertation, because your dissertation research is a project that you have to manage. So you actually become a natural project manager just by way of your research. So my day it really just depends on the day.
And how, working with those nonprofits, how do you apply your STEM background? You said your Ph.D. Work, but how do you apply what you learned in school, other than that, to your job now?
Yeah. So the really cool thing about PhDs is there are a lot of transferable skills. For me, I was doing a lot of quantitative data analysis, and so when I stepped into my position here, I was looking at one of the projects that I worked with I was working with food banks and food pantries, and so you have a number of clients who are coming in, and when you're trying to figure out how to serve the client better, using data and the skills that in data collection and analysis and management is actually really important. And so that is a skill that I got directly from my research, because I had to manage the data that I was collecting day in and day out. So I came in and ended up doing community surveys so we could find out how we were currently serving the clients, food pantry clients, but then also using the results from that data to figure out how to serve them better.
And other than serving the population and benefiting them by providing a source of food, what other service projects have you been involved in, if you'd like to expand a little bit on that?
Sure. So as a commissioner, I get connected to lots of other nonprofits, and so we're always getting information about service projects happening around the state of Maryland. I worked as a volunteer at nonprofits that collect sporting equipment, which sounds really interesting, but use sporting equipment or pre-owned, pre-loved sporting equipment, and then disseminating that to low-income populations that maybe don't have access to it. So I've worked with nonprofits to do that. Obviously, I've worked at food banks. The work that I do in Honduras is about clean water and sanitation, so I've built stoves and installed water filters in homes and built latrines. So there's a whole plethora of things that I've gotten involved in just by being willing to try something different.
And does you're talking about Honduras internationally, so do you have to go there to do those types of things, or do you have a team? You do.
Well, go ahead, finish your question.
Well, just if you had a team who, went with you or did that aspect of the service.
Yeah, so the really cool thing is that I get to manage projects locally, but I also get to travel internationally. And so for Honduras specifically, I have a team of volunteers here, and we kind of problem solve around how we can help the teams that travel down work more efficiently. But I've also led teams in country, and one of the last trip that I went on, which was in January, I had a team of all women executives, and we traveled to Honduras, and we worked with the local government officials within the community that we work in to empower a group of 40 women to just help them think through like vision casting for their own lives and how to take the resources that they have to make a better life for themselves and their families. So it really is very diverse, the types of things that I get to do, which is what I love.
Absolutely. And I guess just as we're going through a pandemic right now, how has the coronavirus impacted your job? You said your last trip was in January, so, it's been quite some time since you've been. What other ways has it impacted your job, your career?
Yeah. So the funny thing is that I was supposed to leave March 4th to go back on another trip, and something happened and I just wasn't able to go. But the woman that I was traveling with, she went, and she was supposed to be there for 5 days, and she ended up being there for 2 weeks, because during that time we went into lockdown because of the coronavirus. So it's definitely had a direct impact on the work that I do in a lot of ways. But because of the type of work that I do, I've really seen a lot of other opportunities arise. So in Calvert County, we had a need for, there were a number of kids who were who were dependent on schools to get their meals. And so we were able to work together with, local partners to make sure that they were still able to get meals even though they were not able to go to school. So that's something that I wasn't doing before the coronavirus that I do now. So now I coordinate an effort to feed 1,300 kids a week with their school, with breakfast and lunch, Monday through Friday. One of the other things I get to do is that through the organization in Honduras, we were having people, there's a GED course that people were coming into a training center to take, but because of the pandemic, they were not able to leave their homes. So now I get to help support other members who are currently down in Honduras. I get to support them in thinking through how do we take this in-person class and adapt it for virtual learning. So the pandemic's changed a lot of things, but it's also given us lots of opportunities to think differently about how do we solve the same problems are there, and if not more, but we can be creative about how we solve them. And that's one of the things that's come as a result of the pandemic.
Absolutely. And I think that the work you're doing is amazing. And I guess this is kind of an off-base question, but if you had the opportunity to sit down and have lunch with one woman in STEM, alive or not, who would it be?
Oh, wow. Let me think. One woman in STEM. Well, so I've been really fortunate to have fantastic mentors along the way, and that really made a huge difference. So I don't know that there's anyone that I would sit down with that I haven't already sat down with because of the mentors that I have. People who really, because I think there's a lot of value to be gained from, people who you don't know, but there's a whole host of information that you can get from people who you know in your current life who are doing the work already. So for me, my mentor from undergraduate, her name is Dr. Arlene Macklin, and she was one of the first African-American women to get a Ph.D. In physics from the University of Virginia, and she's just a powerhouse, and she's amazing. And so she leaves me in a position where I don't really have I don't always recognized the need to reach out to other women in STEM because she is just fantastic and does a great job of connecting me to other people who can help me think about things differently.
And so, as I don't have any more questions for you, I guess the last one that I do is there any advice that you have for high school girls like me looking to go into STEM or looking to go into a career like yours?
Sure. So I think the biggest piece of advice that I would give to girls in high school, and it's also advice that I would probably give to my younger self, is that you don't have to have it all figured out. When I remember in undergraduate, when I was finishing, I thought I knew everything. I thought I had everything figured out. So I'm like, I'm going to go to graduate school, and it's going to take me 4 years to get my Ph.D., and then I'm going to go to medical school, and it's going to take me 4 years to get my my medical degree, and then I'm going to go and do doctors without borders. And because that was what I knew. So I think you can have a plan, but you always want to make sure that you're open to other possibilities, because there's no way that you can know everything at 17. So just have a plan, but leave space for other possibilities, and don't put so much pressure on yourself to have everything figured out right now, because things change every day. No, if you would have asked anyone who made a 5-year plan 5 years ago, probably did not account for the coronavirus, right? They did not account for COVID-19 and how that's changed so many things. So it's not bad to have a plan, but just stay flexible.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for giving your time today to talk to me and inspire girls like me looking to have careers like yours.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you all for listening. If you have any questions or comments, you can contact us through Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at Colga Gems. You can also reach us through email. Our email is colgagems@gmail.com. That is COLGAGEMS. And I'll see y'all next time.